Harold Mitchell's finger hovered over a trigger that might kill him. 800 yards ahead, a Japanese barge cut through black water, carrying 60 armed troops toward Guadalcanal. Behind Mitchell, the wooden deck of PT-48 flexed with each wave. Beneath his hands, a 280-pound aircraft cannon, ripped from a crashed fighter just 14 hours ago, sat bolted to a mount welded from scrap steel. Nobody knew if it would fire. Nobody knew if the deck would hold. Nobody knew if the recoil would tear the gun loose and kill everyone on the bow. Lieutenant Robert Lynch's voice cracked over the noise. "Mitchell, light them up. The night was about to change everything. But let me take you back 3 weeks, because this moment, this impossible shot, began with a graveyard." Mid-October 1942, Guadalcanal. The water around the island had earned a new name, Iron Bottom Sound. 6 American warships rested on the sea floor. 17 PT boat sailors had died in the past month alone, and the killing followed the same script every single night. American PT boats would detect Japanese barge convoys on radar. They'd race to intercept, engines screaming, wake churning white in the darkness. They'd close to torpedo range, 800 yards, 600. The crew would hold their breath as 4 Mark 8 torpedoes, each carrying 466 pounds of TNT, streaked toward the enemy. And every single torpedo would miss. Not because the crews couldn't aim, because physics didn't care about American desperation. The Mark 8 torpedo was designed for one thing: sinking ships. Big ships. Ships that drew 15, 20, 30 feet of water. The minimum depth setting was 10 feet. Japanese Datsu barges drew 5 feet. Do the math. The torpedoes would pass directly underneath their targets like angry fish that couldn't find the surface. Then the Japanese would return fire. Type 92 heavy machine guns. 7.7mm rounds that turned wooden PT boats into floating coffins. The Americans had 50 caliber Brownings, devastating against wooden fishing boats, but these barges weren't fishing boats. 1/4-inch steel plate armor. The 50 cal rounds would spark off the armor like fireworks and do absolutely nothing. Every night the same nightmare. Detect, chase, shoot, miss, burn. 26-year-old Robert Lynch had survived 14 patrols with 0 confirmed kills. He'd watched boats burn. He'd pulled wounded sailors from the water. And every morning, he'd return to Tulagi knowing that tonight, the Japanese would run more barges, more troops, more ammunition, more food. The Tokyo Express never stopped running. October 20th, dawn. Lynch walked across Henderson Field while the sun painted the coral pink. The airfield was a museum of violence. Wrecked P-39 Airacobras lined the runway like mechanical corpses, 23 dead fighters. Some had crashed on landing. Some had been shot down. All of them were cannibalized for parts, instruments, radios, control cables, anything useful. But nobody had touched the guns. Lynch stopped beside a P-39 with its nose buried in the coral. The fighter looked like it had tried to burrow into the earth and died trying. Through the propeller hub, a steel barrel protruded like an accusing finger. A 37mm Oldsmobile M4 automatic cannon, designed to destroy light armor and aircraft. Rate of fire, 150 rounds per minute. Muzzle velocity, 2,000 feet per second. Each high explosive round packed enough punch to core through aluminum like tissue paper. Lynch stood there doing calculations in his head. The Japanese barges had 1/4-inch steel armor. These cannons were built to shred aircraft with thinner skins than that. 150 rounds per minute meant he could put 30 rounds into a target in 12 seconds. But there was a problem. Actually, there were about 50 problems. These were aircraft cannons, designed to be mounted in planes, with structural support from an engine block, with hydraulic systems and electrical systems and cooling systems that all depended on being inside an airplane. Nobody had ever mounted an M4 cannon on a boat. There were no mounting brackets, no procurement forms, no official channels, no doctrine, no approval process. Lynch looked back toward the harbor where PT-48 waited at the dock. Then he looked at the cannon. The question wasn't whether this was allowed. The question was, could it possibly work? At 1,400 hours, Lynch found Commander Alan Calvert in the operations tent. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. Lynch explained what he wanted to do. Calvert listened without interrupting. When Lynch finished, there was a long silence filled only with the sound of distant aircraft engines. Calvert could have said no. He should have said no. If the installation failed, if crew members died, Calvert would face a court-martial, unauthorized equipment, destruction of Navy property, negligent homicide. His career would be over. Instead, Calvert said 3 words, make it work. By 1,630 hours, 4 PT boat crews were walking Henderson Field carrying cutting torches and wrenches. They had until nightfall. The Japanese would be running barges tonight, just like every night. Technical Sergeant James Coogan reached the first wreck, a P-39 that had taken a 20mm cannon round through the cockpit 3 weeks earlier. The pilot's body had been removed. Everything else remained exactly as it had crashed. Coogan crawled into the nose section with tools that were almost the right size. The M4 cannon was mounted with 8 high-tensile steel bolts. Each needed a 15/16" socket. Coogan had 3/4. In wartime, close enough. Removing the cannon meant disconnecting hydraulic lines, charging cables, ammunition feeds, firing solenoids, then cutting through the engine mount. 2 hours per aircraft if everything went perfectly. Nothing went perfectly. The second wreck had been cooking in tropical heat for 11 days. The hydraulic fluid had turned to jelly. The charging cable had corroded to green powder. When they tried to remove the mounting bolts, nothing moved. They needed penetrating oil. Henderson Field didn't have penetrating oil. Someone suggested aviation gasoline. They poured it on and waited 20 minutes while the sun hammered down, and everyone sweated through their shirts and wondered if this insane plan would even get past step 1. The bolts came loose. Barely. By 1,730 hours, 3 cannons lay on the coral. Coogan inspected them like a surgeon examining organs. The first cannon had a hairline crack in the hydraulic recoil cylinder. Useless. The second had a bent pawl in the feed mechanism, maybe fixable. The third was perfect, 1 out of 3. Those were the odds they were working with. Here's what they needed: a gun mount that could absorb the recoil of a 280-pound cannon firing 150 rounds per minute, a mount that could rotate 360 degrees, a mount that could survive on a plywood deck flexing and pounding through waves at 40 knots. Here's what they had: a machine shop with 1 lathe, 1 drill press, and a welding rig powered by a diesel generator that kept cutting out. Chief Machinist's mate, Donald Frey, designed the mount in 40 minutes using a grease pencil on scrap aluminum. The design was simple because it had to be. They had no time for complexity. A 12-inch steel baseplate, a vertical pipe, a rotating collar with bearing surfaces, a yoke to hold the cano. All built from landing gear, salvaged from destroyed aircraft. They started welding at 1,815 hours. The generator could only run 5 minutes before overheating. Weld, wait, weld, wait. The sun was setting. The barges would be running soon. By 2,100 hours, they had something that looked like it was built in a high school shop class. Ugly welds, scorched paint, 3 degrees of wobble in the rotating collar, but it would hold a cannon, probably. They loaded it on a truck. 3 sailors rode in the back holding the gun mount steady while the truck bounced down the coral road toward Lunga Point. Behind them, the sun had vanished completely. The Japanese would be leaving their bases right now. PT-48 waited at Tulagi. The cannon arrived at 2,230 hours on a Higgins boat that churned across Iron Bottom Sound, carrying 280 pounds of untested equipment and even heavier uncertainty. Lynch's crew had already marked 4 mounting points on the bow deck. 3/4-inch plywood over 2 inches of oak framing. Strong enough for a 50 caliber turret, maybe strong enough for this. Installing the base plate meant drilling 4 holes by hand. Hand crank drill, 30 minutes per hole. While they drilled, other PT boats were already departing for patrol, engines rumbling, crews checking weapons, standard loadout, torpedoes that couldn't hit barges, 50 caliber guns that couldn't penetrate armor. PT-48 would launch late. But if this worked, they'd have something none of the other boats had. By 115 hours on October 21st, the base plate was bolted down. They lifted the cannon onto the mount. It fit. The collar rotated, not smoothly. There was binding, friction, resistance, but it moved. Now the hard question, ammunition. The M4 used horseshoe-shaped magazines, holding 30 rounds each, 40 pounds when loaded. The magazines were designed to sit in an aircraft ammunity. On bay, with quick-change mechanisms and structural support, PT-48 had a plywood deck. They stacked 6 loaded magazines next to the gun. In combat, someone would hand-feed them while someone else fired. Crude, slow, dangerous, but maybe functional. At 0200 hours, Harold Mitchell sat behind the cannon on an ammunition box and tried to remember everything Coogan had told him in their 5-minute training session at the dock. Point the gun, press the trigger, change magazines when empty. The hydraulic recoil system will absorb most of the shock. Probably. Mitchell had fired 50 caliber Brownings on 12 patrols. He'd never fired an aircraft cannon. Neither had anyone else on PT-48. At 0215 hours, Lynch gave the order. PT-48 departed to Tulagi. The cannon had never been test-fired. The mount had never been stress-tested. Nobody knew if this would work. In 6 hours, they'd find out if they'd built a weapon or a coffin. 2,355 hours. The radar operator's voice cut through the engine noise. Surface contacts, bearing 320 degrees, 4,000 yards. 4 contacts, speed 8 knots. Course and bearing consistent with Japanese barge convoys running supplies to Guadalcanal. Lynch altered course to intercept. PT-48 was running on 2 engines to reduce noise. 15 knots, quiet as a wooden boat with 3 Packard engines could manage. Mitchell sat behind the cannon, 6 loaded magazines within reach. His hands weren't shaking, but they wanted to. At 3,000 yards, they could see them. 4 Datsu barges in line formation, each 49 feet long, 14-foot beam, single diesel engine, each carrying a Type 92 heavy machine gun, each loaded with troops. Mitchell could see the shapes of men sitting on the decks. 60 men per barge, 240 men total, all heading to kill Americans at Henderson Field. Lynch kept closing. 1,500 yards. 1,000. Standard doctrine said launch torpedoes at 800 yards. But standard doctrine also said the torpedoes would miss. So Lynch kept closing. Mitchell charged the cannon using the manual handle. The mechanism cycled. The first round seated in the chamber, he flipped off the safety. At 1,000 yards, the lead Japanese barge spotted them. The Type 92 opened up. 7.7 millimeter tracers drew orange lines across the black water. The rounds hit 30 yards short, but they were walking closer. Lynch held course, 800 yards. Mitchell aimed at the lead barge and pressed the trigger. The cannon roared, not the sharp crack of a 50 caliber, a deep, hammering boom that lit the entire bow deck white. The muzzle flash was blinding. The recoil drove the gun backward in its mount. The deck flexed. The pedestal held. The cannon fired. Mitchell kept his finger down. The M4 cycled at 2.5 rounds per second. The magazine held 30 rounds. He emptied it in 12 seconds of continuous thunder. 800 yards away, the lead Japanese barge started coming apart. The high explosive rounds hit along the waterline. Each round punched through the quarter-inch steel armor like it was cardboard. The first 3 penetrated clean. The fourth one found something important inside. The barge exploded. Not caught fire, exploded. Orange flame erupted from the center. The steel plates peeled back like a flower opening. Men were jumping into the water. The barge kept moving forward on momentum, burning, and then it settled by the bow and stopped. 12 seconds. 30 rounds. 1 barge destroyed. Mitchell yanked the empty magazine off. His hands were moving on pure adrenaline now. The horseshoe feed came away clean. He grabbed the second magazine and slammed it onto the cannon. 8 seconds to reload, an eternity in combat. The second barge in the formation tried to turn away. PT-48's helmsman followed. Lynch closed to 600 yards. Mitchell fired again. 30 rounds, 12 seconds, 22 hits. The barge's armor stopped the first 5 rounds, sparks in the darkness. The 6th one penetrated. The 7th found something volatile. The explosion was visible for miles. Not fuel, ammunition. The barge was carrying ammunition and it cooked off all at once. The blast wave rolled across the water. Debris rained down. When the flash cleared, there was nothing left. The barge had disintegrated. The 3rd and 4th barges scattered, one north toward Savo Island, one south toward Guadalcanal. Mitchell loaded his 3rd magazine. The mount's rotating collar was already binding from heat. He had to muscle the gun to track the southern barge. 700 yards. Mitchell fired. The barge fired back. 7.7 millimeters rounds hitting PT-48's bow. 1 round punched through the plywood 18 inches from Mitchell's position. He didn't stop firing. The 37 millimeters rounds walked up the barge from stern to bow. The engine died. The barge lost way and drifted. Men were abandoning ship. PT-48 broke off at 00:20 hours. 3 magazines, 90 rounds. 2 Japanese barges destroyed, 1 disabled, 0 American casualties. The gun hadn't jammed, the mount hadn't failed, the deck hadn't collapsed. It worked. Lynch radioed Commander Calvert at Tulagi. The transmission was 4 words: "The aircraft cannon works." By 0300 hours, every PT boat commander in Squadron 3 was demanding one for his boat. What happened next is the story of how desperation becomes doctrine. By October 23rd, 3 more PT boats had 37 mm cannons. Henderson Field was being systematically stripped of every flyable weapon from every unflyable aircraft. Teams got faster with practice. The first cannon removal took 2 hours. The fourth 2. 55 minutes. Chief Frey improved the mount design after examining PT-48's gun after combat. The rotating collar showed excessive wear. The bearing surfaces had scored from recoil forces. He added bronze bushings salvaged from aircraft wheel assemblies. The second-generation mounts rotated smoothly under combat loading, but ammunition became the bottleneck. Henderson Field Armory had horseshoe magazines for P-39 seconds. Each held 30 rounds but had to be loaded by hand. 8 minutes per magazine if you worked fast. 4 loaders working 12-hour shifts could produce 40 magazines per day. 4 PT boats, each carrying 6 magazines per patrol. 2 patrols per night. 24 magazines per patrol. 48 magazines per night needed. 40 magazines per day produced. The math barely worked, but it worked. October 24th, PT-40 engaged 3 barges off Cambo Bay with its newly installed cannon. 2 barges destroyed in the first magazine. 30 rounds, 20 seconds of firing. Both burning and sinking within 2 minutes. The Japanese noticed immediately. Radio intercepts from October 25th indicated barge crews were reporting PT boats with heavy cannons and explosive shells. One intercepted message used the phrase, "demon boats with aircraft guns." For weeks, Japanese barges had operated with relative impunity. American torpedoes couldn't touch them. Now they were being destroyed before they could deliver supplies. The psychological impact was enormous. By November 1st, 8 PT boats in Squadron 3 operated with salvaged 37mm cannons. Henderson Field had been picked clean. 21 cannons removed, 17 in service, 4 held as spares. The numbers told the story. 8 patrols with cannons, 23 Japanese barges engaged, 14 destroyed, 6 damaged, 3 escaped, 0 PT boats lost. Commander Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron South Pacific sent a classified dispatch to the Bureau of Ordnance in Washington on November 18th. The dispatch detailed the field modification, described the combat results, and requested something that almost never happens: official approval for equipment that had been installed without permission. Normally, this would take months. Design review, safety analysis, procurement planning, production scheduling. The military doesn't move fast, but the combat results from Guadalcanal were undeniable. December 7, 1942, exactly 1 year after Pearl Harbor, the Bureau of Ordnance authorized production of standardized pedestal mounts for M4 cannons on PT boats. Initial production run, 100 units. Delivery timeline, 90 days. A field modification built from crashed aircraft and scrap steel had become official United States Navy equipment in less than 8 weeks. The weapon goes to war. By January 1943, 24 PT boats in the Solomon Islands had 37mm cannons. The barge-busting capability spread across the entire PT boat force in the South Pacific. The results spoke for themselves. 37 patrols, 41 barges destroyed, 19 damaged, 8 escaped. More importantly, PT boat losses dropped by 65%. September through November 1942, before cannons, 6 boats lost. December through February, with cannons, 2 boats lost. Neither loss was attributed to barge engagements. The cannon gave PT boats offensive capability they'd never had with torpedoes alone. More than that, it gave them something they desperately needed: survivability. The Japanese adapted. Barge convoys began traveling with destroyer escorts. PT boats couldn't fight destroyers. The 37mm cannon was devastating against barges, but useless against 3-inch destroyer armor. The tactical balance shifted again, but by then the damage was done. Japanese supply lines to Guadalcanal were strangled. Troops weren't getting food. Ammunition wasn't arriving. The barges that had been running unopposed were now burning on the water. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 8 deployed to New Guinea in March 1943. They arrived with 37mm cannons as standard armament. Factory mounts, new M4 cannons, adequate ammunition. The field modification from Guadalcanal had become standard equipment. New Guinea validated everything. Different waters, different tactical conditions, same results. Squadron 8 destroyed over 60 Japanese barges in their first 3 months. By June 1943, the Bureau of Ordnance was developing an improved cannon specifically for naval use, the 37mm M9. Longer barrel, higher muzzle velocity, heavier construction. The M9 was designed from the start as a naval weapon, not an improvised aircraft gun. The M9 entered production in August 1943, manufactured by Colt in Hartford, Connecticut. By January 1944, the 37mm cannon was factory equipment on PT boats. Elko Naval Division in Bayonne, New Jersey, and Higgins Industries in New Orleans installed M9 cannons during construction. New PT boats rolled off production lines with cannons already mounted. The field modification from Henderson Field had taken 18 months to become official doctrine. October 1942 to January 1944. From salvaged aircraft parts to factory standard equipment, post-war analysis by the Navy's Bureau of Ships examined the numbers across all theaters. PT boats without cannons, August-September 1942, 0.3 enemy vessels destroyed per patrol. PT boats with cannons, October 1943, August 1945, 1.8 vessels destroyed per patrol, 6 times more effective. American casualties told the same story. PT boat crew losses in the Solomons. August-September 1942, 4.2 sailors killed per week. October 1942, February 1943, after cannons, 1.7 sailors killed per week, 60%. Reduction. Total Japanese vessels destroyed by PT boats with 37mm cannons. Over 800 confirmed kills. Barges, small freighters, patrol boats, subchasers, landing craft. 800 barges meant 48,000 troops that never reached their destinations, or 6,400 tons of ammunition and food that never arrived. Japanese Vice Admiral Mikawa Gunichi commanded naval forces in the Solomons. His staff kept meticulous records. Their post-war reports showed that PT boats with 37mm cannons had destroyed 73% of barge convoys between November 1944 and January 1945. 73%. The Japanese called PT boats devil boats and green dragons. The 37mm cannon had earned those names. Lieutenant Robert Lynch survived the war. He commanded PT-48 through 15 months of combat operations, 47 patrols, 19 confirmed kills. He received the Navy Cross for actions in November 1942. The citation specifically mentioned the innovation of mounting aircraft cannons on PT boats. Lynch returned to civilian life in Philadelphia, worked as an electrical engineer, died in 1978. He never spoke publicly about the cannon modification. Technical Sergeant James Coogan spent the rest of the war maintaining PT boat cannons. He trained over 200 gunners' mates on maintenance procedures. After the war, he remained in the Air Force, retired as a master sergeant in 1962. His detailed maintenance logs, documenting every cannon removed, every modification made, every combat malfunction and repair, survive in the National Archives. Chief Machinist's mate Donald Frey designed the original pedestal mount in Henderson Field's machine shop with a grease pencil and 40 minutes. His crude design became the basis for factory mounts manufactured 18 months later. Frey received no recognition during the war, no medal, no commendation. He returned to Tacoma, Washington, after the war. Worked at a shipyard. Died in 1991 at age 73. Gunner's mate second class Harold Mitchell fired the first 37mm cannon shot in anger from a PT boat on October 21, 1942. He survived that engagement and 42 more patrols. Mitchell transferred to PT 109 in January 1943 as a gunnery instructor. He received a Bronze Star for actions at Vella La Vella in August 1943. After the war, he worked for Boeing in Seattle. Died in 2006. What IT meant. The 37mm cannon story is not really about a weapon. It's about what happens when desperate people refuse to accept impossible. It's about sailors who looked at crashed aircraft and saw solutions. It's about commanders who took career-ending risks because the alternative was watching their men die. Most military innovations follow a pattern: requirements identified, designs drafted, prototypes built, testing conducted, production authorized, deployment planned. Years of process. This innovation followed none of those steps. It began with crews cutting guns from crashed aircraft, welding crude mounts from scrap steel, testing the concept in combat, proving effectiveness through results. Only then did the official channels respond. The timeline from first combat use to factory installation was 18 months. By bureaucratic standards, remarkably fast. By combat standards, when sailors were dying every night, painfully slow. But here's what matters: it happened. Commander Alan Calvert authorized that first installation without higher approval. He took institutional risk. If the mount had failed and killed crew members, Calvert would have faced court-martial. He authorized it anyway. Bureau of Ordnance deserves recognition too. When they received that dispatch in November 1942, detailing an unauthorized field modification, they could have rejected it. Instead, they evaluated. The combat results: 14 barges destroyed, 8 patrols, 0 PT boat losses. The data was compelling. They approved the concept and authorized production. The lesson transcends the specific weapon. Innovation in combat requires commanders willing to take risks, crews willing to experiment, and higher headquarters willing to evaluate results over doctrine. Of the 53 1PT boats that served during World War II, only 12 survive today. 8 are preserved as museum vessels. 4 remain in private ownership. Most of the survivors retain their 37mm cannon mounts. PT 617 at Battleship Cove in Fall River, Massachusetts, displays a functional M9 on its bow mount. The mount is the factory standard design, developed from Donald Frey's improvised pedestal, welded together in a machine shop at Henderson Field, while Japanese barges ran supplies in the darkness outside. Stand in front of PT 617 today, and you can see the cannon. You can touch the mount. You can read the specifications on the plaques. What you can't see is the graveyard of wrecked P-39 seconds on coral, the cutting torches at dusk, the hand-cranked drill at midnight, Harold Mitchell sitting behind an untested weapon, waiting to find out if it would fire or explode. You can't see Robert Lynch watching 3 Japanese barges and making the decision to try something that had never been tried. You can't see Alan Calvert saying make it work and betting his career on a desperate idea. But they're all there, in the welds, in the design, in the fact that this weapon exists at all. 800 Japanese vessels destroyed, thousands of lives saved, all because some sailors looked at crashed airplanes and refused to accept that the problem couldn't be solved. If this story moved you, if you made it all the way to the end, I need you to do something. Hit that like button right now. Every single like tells the algo rhythm to show this story to more people who need to know that Lynch, Mitchell, Frey, and Coogan existed, that they mattered, that what they did in the darkness off Guadalcanal saved lives. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories like this from dusty archives every single day. Real innovation, real people, real sacrifice. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia. Our community stretches across the world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Thank you for making it to the end. And thank you for making sure that Harold Mitchell's first shot, the one that lit up the darkness on October 21st, 1942, doesn't fade into silence. These sailors turned crashed fighters into naval weapons, and they changed the war doing it.